February is the most important time in the sowing calendar. And in today's video, I shall tell you the 15 seeds that I shall be sowing in the month of February. The reason why sowing seeds in February is so important is that for some seeds, we actually just want to get started, to get out into the plots so that we can get a quick harvest. Things like salad onions and radishes come to mind. Sometimes we need to sow the seed in February because some vegetables take a long time to mature. I'm thinking of leeks here. And then some seeds we need to sow now in February so that they harvest in good time to allow for a succession planting to be able to have enough time to grow to maturity. If this was not free of its previous crop in July, we would have no Swedes to eat. If the broad beans hadn't been harvested by the end of May, beginning of June, there would be no room for sprouts. So you can see why, by just sowing in February, those first plantings that you make, they're going to harvest in time so that you can get your succession planting in. Of course, if you only grow food to eat for the spring and summer season, this is not going to apply to you so much. Now, the first thing I want to say before we get into the seeds that you could be sowing in February is that everything we sowed in our January 4 seeds to sow in January video can be sown in the month of February. So if you didn't sow those 4 seeds in January, add them to your list for February sowings. If you want to know what they are, just go onto our channel page and find the video 4 seeds to sow in January. Those of you that have followed our channel for some time, you'll know that I normally bring the what to sow and jobs for every month, usually right at the very beginning of the month. It's normally the first video we produce of the month. This is a few days earlier, and that just goes to show you how pivotal I think it is to get these seeds sown if you want to do succession planting. If you haven't got your seeds yet, at least you've got the chance to go out and buy the seeds that you're going to need so that you can then sow them when we sow ours. You can see that the onions that we sowed, they've all come up really lovely. Got great germination. I've now brought them up to the polytunnel where they'll receive all the light that they can get at this time of the year. And of course it's increasing ever more as we go into the month of February. I can see that the temperature currently in here at the moment is 17.8 degrees, even though it's actually only about 3 degrees outside at the moment. Beautiful sunny day though. And last night it got down to 2.3 degrees in this tunnel. We'll begin with the allium family. This month I should be sowing our shallots. Now, we used to grow shallots from sets, but ever since we discovered these Zebrun shallots, these are all I grow. They produce really nice big shallots. In fact, too big sometimes. So I'm going to experiment with doing a bit of multi-sowing with these, and I'll report back to you on that as and when we can see what the results are. Now, next in the allium family, you can be sowing your first spring onions. As you know, myself and Mrs. W, we're always trying to run trials, tests, and we actually did sow some spring onions around about mid-January to see how they fared. For us, it's not quite so critical that they get sown so early. I'm just interested to know whether they do actually harvest any earlier. The reason why it's not so critical for us is that we already have spring onions outside in the garden that have overwintered in the greenhouse and indeed here in the polytunnel. We do like a good spring onion, and there's something that will grow at this time of the year, and if you're starting to run out of your stored onions round about April time, you can just use a bunch of spring onions to get that lovely onion flavour. Now we are trying 2 new varieties this year. The ones we overwinter, a variety called Guardsman. I won't ever veer away from that because I've found those to be the most hardy. We haven't had any single problem whatsoever. Touch Mrs. W's wood. They just seem to come through our winters, and, well, in fact, never mind about April. The ones that are outside that we actually sowed right at the very end of August, I was actually eating them last weekend. I had a bunch, didn't I?
We did, yeah, yeah.
All right, they're not fully formed, but they still had that lovely, crisp salad onion taste. But for our spring and summer salad onions, we're sowing a variety called Snow Queen. And I'm sowing a variety called North Holland Blooded Red Mate. Now, I've never grown red salad onions before, but I do know that Mrs. W likes to have lots of colour on our plates when we eat.
Definitely.
So I thought we'll try some red ones this year.
Thank you. Fingers crossed for those.
Also from the allium family, leeks. Now, I usually sow my leeks in April, and that's worked really well for us. By the time they need to go out sometime in July, we usually get some really good results. But I have to say, if anything really let us down last year, it was the leeks. They were extremely disappointing. They're quite small.
Yeah, they didn't get very big at all, did they?
And you have to have several of them to make a meal. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the taste of leek. So, you know, it's not a major problem to me, other than we're used to having quite nice sized leeks and just pull a couple and get a nice meal from them. So I thought what I'd do this year is experiment with sowing them at different times. And I know some people, you know, they do sow their leeks in January. I think that's a bit early for us. But I'm certainly going to try some in the months of February, March and April. And we'll get them out into the plots. We'll mark them so that we know which ones were sown when, and then we'll see which ones perform best according to the time that they were sown.
And obviously another reason why we can sow these leeks a little earlier this year is that we're not, usually the leeks follow potatoes in the ground, and we're not actually going to grow any potatoes in the ground this year, are we? So we're going to have that space a little bit earlier to be able to start them off earlier.
Yeah, that's well remembered, Mrs. W. I'd forgotten that was a reason why. I must refer more to my scripts. And if you want to see when we sow the seeds for the plants that are going to succeed, the ones that we're going to be growing for the first part of the growing season, then do make sure that you are subscribed to our channel. And of course, most importantly, do make sure that you click the bell icon. And that way, you'll be notified whenever we upload a video. So next, the lovely beetroot. February is the time to sow your beetroot. When we sow our beetroot in February, we harvest it typically in June. Sometimes a little early. It depends on what the spring weather is like. If the weather is fair, then we get them slightly earlier. I don't need these to get really large. The second sowing that we do of them, to replace these, we do get quite large. I don't think we harvested ours until the turn of the year, did we? It
No.
was January when we harvested the
We
last
sort of
of our
harvested a
beetroots.
few as we were going along, as we
Yeah.
wanted them, but
Yeah. And they were fine, weren't they?
They were, yeah, absolutely fine.
I think we had one that was had gone soft, hadn't we?
Yes.
Out of all of those,
Yeah.
and there must have been, what, 20 beetroots there?
Yes.
Yeah,
At
easily.
least, yeah.
So, yeah, these ones, we like to pick just that little bit smaller. We generally eat them with our salads. So, I always find that the smaller they are, the more sweeter they are. And the varieties we're going to sow, first of all, our old favourite Bolt Hardy. It is a good beetroot to sow at this time of the year because, as its name suggests, Bolt Hardy very rarely does it bolt. In fact, I can't ever remember these bolting on us. Can you?
I can't either.
Touch wood.
There's a lot of touching wood. That's because I've got the wood in here, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Although I've got the bench.
Yeah, true.
And then last year we tried Burpee's Golden for the first time. And I love them. I actually enjoy the flavour of these more than I do the Bolt Hardy. The red Bolt Hardy have a real earthy taste about them, which I can eat and I would eat, but I do prefer these. They don't get as big as the Bolt Hardy, and yeah, they just seem to have a much sweeter taste. I know you enjoyed them too, didn't you, Mrs.
I
W?
like them, but my favourites are the red ones, the Bolt Hardy. So it's just,
See what I mean, folks?
Preference, personal preference.
So we know we're going to have salad onions underway, and we're going to have our beetroot that are going to come ready. So we ought to have some lettuce to go with them, Mrs. W.
Yes, yeah.
We don't sow ours in January because, quite simply, we already have lettuce. We have the Winter Density and the Arctic King. In fact, we still even have some Lolla Rossa here in this polytunnel. And we keep taking the outside leaves off, having meals off of those, and they'll continue to do that for the next month, 6 weeks or so. In fact, the harvests are only going to start getting larger from them because the daylight length is lengthening, and of course it is very slowly but surely warming up. And then eventually it shall make a small heart and we'll have all of those lettuces out of there. But what I do need to think of now is what I'm going to sow now so that we can continue to enjoy the lovely crisp taste of fresh lettuce throughout the year. And there's nothing new here for our lettuce. This year we have lettuce Little Gem and we have lettuce Webb's Wonderful. They're the two lettuces that we really enjoy and like. Doubtless you'll probably sow some more Lolla Rossa.
Yes, I will. Yes, definitely. I like that.
These are the ones that I'm sowing in February.
The Lolla Rossa is another colour, isn't it? You see, I like colour.
I know, yes, I know. Then, of course, the last thing that we're going to need are some radish to go along with our salads. We do like the crispy crunch of a nice radish. For this month, I'm going to be sowing the French breakfast. We do sow other varieties a bit later on in the year, but I find this one does really well. And you can see here that the ones we overwintered, they haven't died. In fact, they're doing quite well. So it shouldn't be too long before we actually start to eat those. And then these ones that we now sow, they will follow on from the ones that we already have in the ground. Herbs. Now, we use herbs in just about everything that we cook or make in one way or another. And February is a good time to be sowing parsley, dill, and thyme. They can all be sown during the month of February. And I know that, I can't think who it was now, Mrs. W, but somebody did leave us a comment, I think back in January, asking us if we could do a little bit more on herbs.
Yes.
So we already have established herbs, but it's not going to do us any harm to replace some of those. Certainly the parsley will do. We've had some good harvests of parsley, and of course we sowed some, if you remember, last September, which we've had small harvests from over the winter months. They've been growing away on our windowsill. But I do think it's a good time to start, for us anyway, to now start replenishing some of the plants that we have in our herb bed. So keep an eye out for those videos as and when we sow these and we get them out into our herb bed. As you know, we overwinter our broad beans. They're looking really good outside there, but if you don't overwinter yours, February is a really good month to sow your broad beans. You sow broad beans in January and you take them down to the house, they become very big very quickly because of the heat that you have in your house, and you quickly get really big plants. However, if you sow them in January and leave them up here and it's a really, really cold January with biting winds and frost, which we've had in January, then you have trouble with them germinating. Better off having trouble with them germinating than them getting too big, because then when you do put them out in March, and we get some strong winds in March, they are very, very susceptible to their stems being broken. So yeah, February is a really good month to sow your broad beans. They'll be up here by the time we get to mid-March, ready to go out into the plots. Then of course, peas. Now over the years I've sown our peas in March, but I go to a very, very late February sowing now. I find that works better for us. Don't really seem to get any problems. If you sowed them at the beginning of February, it's probably a good idea to use them as pea shoots. But I sow them right at the very end of February and not mid-March as we used to. And then lastly, we shall look at the family of brassicas. The first brassica you can be sowing is kohlrabi. It's done really well for us, the ones that we sowed last year to give us harvest during the autumn and early winter periods. Really nice, weren't they, Mrs. W?
They were, yes.
And I would implore any of you, they don't take up too much space. They do give you that lovely sort of cabbagey taste. So do try it if you haven't tried it before. Now is the time to be sowing your summer harvesting cauliflower. Now the next two brassicas that I want to look at that you can sow this month are cabbage and turnips. Now I've always sown our cabbages in February, ready for a June harvest. The turnips will harvest probably late March and April, depending on how large you want the turnips. But what I did do, I sowed some in mid-January, just as a trial to do an experiment. And you can see here that they have germinated really well. We just took them down to the house. They germinated in less than a week. And then we've brought them back up to the polytunnel as soon as they germinated, and here they've been ever since. They've been up here about a week, just over a week. So they're not running away. They're of a good size. And they're not getting too leggy. The cabbages I shall thin down to 1, where we have germination of 2. But of course the turnips I always multi-sow, and they will go out into the plots, whatever number is in each cell. Now the turnips are 2 keel cross. Myself and Mrs. W have been growing this now. I think this is the 3rd or 4th season that we've grown this, and I won't go back to any other turnip. I don't really want huge turnips, and these are absolutely gorgeous when they're actually less than the size of a golf ball, aren't they?
Yes.
They really do have a great taste and don't take very long.
They're also quite nice grated onto a salad.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I like
they
that.
are.
Yeah.
Now, the cabbage that I've grown is a variety called Savoy King. And we used to grow this Last season and the season before, I didn't. But actually, I rather missed that variety. They do actually make really quite nice sized cabbages. The last couple of seasons, we've been growing the variety Providence. Nothing wrong with Providence, but the one thing I did find with it is that I couldn't actually sow it in February and get a harvest in June. It would tip over into the next month, so it took just that little bit longer to get to maturity. Whereas, as my memory serves me, when we grew this variety before, a February sowing gave us a June harvest. And of course, that's all important for us. We need those plants out of that bed in June so that they can be replaced with something else. And then last of all, Calabrese broccoli. And we did a sow along with many of you last season, and we all grew it together. And I know a lot of you had some really good harvests and you really enjoyed that. We generally always do get good harvests of the Calabrese broccoli. And if you've never grown the Calabrese broccoli before, I do know that this is part of the How to Grow series that we've produced from seed to table. So if you want to know how to grow this from seed to table, then watch this video next. Have a great gardening week, and myself and Mrs. W, we shall see you all very soon.